What's the most unfair thing that happened to you at school? Our principal required students to verbally thank every staff member who provided any service or lose privileges related to that service. At first, it seemed easy enough, just say thanks and move on. But Principal Sanford monitored this religiously through staff reports. The janitor actually carried a clipboard where he'd mark down which students thanked him for mopping. The librarian would revoke computer access if you forgot to thank her for literally just sitting at her desk while you checked out your own books using the automated system. The worst was having to thank the security guard for searching our backpacks every morning. "Thank you for violating my privacy," we'd all say, before Sanford decided sarcasm didn't count. One kid forgot to thank him sincerely and couldn't enter the building for 3 days until his parents threatened to call the news. The security guard just stood there each morning, waiting for his mandatory gratitude like some kind of praise vampire. I'd gotten pretty good at the routine. Thank the bus driver, thank the security guard, thank the attendance lady for marking me present, thank the janitor for existing, thank the cafeteria ladies for slopping mystery meat onto my tray. It was degrading but manageable. I'd even trained myself to thank people in my sleep when the nurse took my temperature during a fever check. She actually woke me up to make sure I said it clearly enough for her records. My friend had lost bathroom privileges for a month after forgetting to thank the janitor during her period. She bled through her pants in algebra because she couldn't access the bathroom, and the school's response was that she should have been more grateful. Another kid lost library access during finals week and failed his research paper. The principal called it a life lesson in appreciation. I woke up with strep throat one Monday morning, the kind where your throat feels like you've been gargling broken glass. My mom wanted to keep me home, but I had a chemistry final I couldn't miss. She gave me antibiotics and sent me with a note explaining I'd lost my voice completely. I could only communicate through gestures and wheezing. I managed to croak out a barely audible thanks to the bus driver and security guard, sounding like a dying frog. They accepted it, probably out of pity. The attendance lady let me just wave, but when I got to lunch, holding my tray out for food, I opened my mouth and nothing came out, not even a whisper. The cafeteria lady, Mrs. Turner, stood there with her ladle suspended over my tray, waiting. I pointed to my throat. I showed her my doctor's note. I mouthed thank you as dramatically as possible. I even did a little bow of gratitude. Nothing worked. She pulled the tray away and pointed to the sign, "Verbal thanks required." I wrote thank you on my hand and showed her. She shook her head. I tried to make any sound at all, but my throat was so swollen that only air came out. The security guard came over and escorted me out of the cafeteria, saying I was refusing to comply with gratitude requirements. I spent the rest of the week buying bags of chips from the vending machine with my last $10, but by Thursday, even those were gone. I couldn't bring lunch from home because we didn't have any food at home. That's why I needed the free lunch program. By Friday, I was so lightheaded from not eating that I could barely see straight. During my chemistry final, the room started spinning. The periodic table on the wall looked like it was melting. I remember thinking the multiple choice bubbles were dancing around the page, and then I hit the floor face first, breaking my nose on the way down. Blood everywhere, complete chaos, and the school nurse yelling at everyone to give me space. I woke up in the hospital with an IV in my arm, and my mom crying beside the bed. The doctor said I'd passed out from malnutrition combined with dehydration, and that I was lucky I didn't crack my skull when I fell. My nose was broken and I had a concussion from hitting the floor. My mom had already called a lawyer about suing the school for denying me food access. Principal Sanford showed up in my hospital room with a clipboard and that same fake sympathetic face they all did. "I understand you've had a medical incident," he said, "but I need to inform you that you failed to thank Nurse Stevens when she administered first aid after your fall. That's automatic suspension from health services at school." He actually pulled out another form. "Also, you'll need to thank the janitor for cleaning up your blood, or you'll lose building access privileges when you return." My mom stood up so fast her chair fell over. "Are you seriously here to punish my hospitalized child for not thanking people while unconscious?" "The rule exists to teach gratitude," Principal Sanford said, still holding his clipboard. "No exceptions, even for medical emergencies. Speaking of which," he turned to me, "you'll need to thank me for this visit or lose administrative access, meaning you can't appeal any of these decisions." I stared at Principal Sanford standing there with his clipboard while my broken nose throbbed and the room spun slightly from the concussion. Something inside me cracked like ice breaking on a frozen pond. My mom's hand grabbed mine so hard I felt her nails dig into my skin. I tried to push myself up in the hospital bed, but the pain meds made everything feel like I was moving through thick syrup. The IV tube pulled tight against my arm. Sanford just stood there waiting with his pen ready. Mom shot up from her chair and pointed at the door. She told him to get out right now or she'd call security herself. Her voice shook with rage. Sanford started saying something about school policy being clear, but Mom was already hitting the red nurse call button over and over. She yelled for someone to remove this man from her child's room immediately. 2 nurses rushed in looking confused. Mom pointed at Sanford and said he was harassing her injured child. The nurses looked at each other and then at Sanford's clipboard. One nurse stepped between him and my bed, while the other called hospital security. Sanford kept trying to explain about the gratitude requirements, but the nurses weren't having it. A security guard showed up within minutes and escorted Sanford out while he protested about needing my verbal thanks. The door closed behind them, and Mom's whole body was shaking. She pulled out her phone with trembling fingers and scrolled through her contacts. She called her friend who worked as a paralegal at a law firm downtown. I could hear her explaining everything in a rush of words about the school denying me food, and Sanford showing up here demanding thanks while I had a concussion. Her friend said she'd get someone there as soon as possible. Mom hung up and sat back down beside me. She held my hand, and we just waited. About 2 hours later, a man in a dark suit knocked on the door. He introduced himself as Mr. Terrell from the law firm. He pulled up a chair and asked me to tell him everything from the beginning. I explained about the gratitude policy and how the janitor had a clipboard. I told him about kids losing bathroom access and my friend bleeding through her pants. He wrote everything down in a yellow legal pad. I described having strep throat and losing my voice completely. He asked for the doctor's note I'd carried to the school. Mom found it in my backpack, which the ambulance crew had brought. I explained how Mrs. Turner refused to give me food even though I couldn't speak. Mr. Terrell's face got darker as I talked. I told him about surviving on vending machine chips until my money ran out. He asked why I didn't bring food from home. I felt embarrassed embarrassed, explaining we didn't have food at home and relied on the free lunch program. He wrote that down and underlined it twice. I described getting dizzy during the chemistry final and hitting the floor face first. Mr. Terrell took out his phone and photographed my broken nose and the bruises on my face. He photographed the IV in my arm and the hospital bracelet. He asked the nurse for copies of my medical chart. She said she'd need authorization, but he pulled out some legal forms he'd already prepared. While we waited for the medical records, he explained that denying food to a student violated federal law. He said the Americans with Disabilities Act protected students with medical conditions. He explained that schools receiving federal funding couldn't deny basic services like food. He said what happened to me was both illegal and could be considered child endangerment. The next morning, I woke up to voices in my room. 3 kids from my school were there with their parents. Mom explained that she'd posted about what happened on social media, and these families wanted to help. The first girl looked familiar from my English class. She told Mr. Terrell that she'd been denied bathroom access for a whole week after forgetting to thank the janitor. She said she'd begged to use the bathroom during math class, but the teacher said she didn't have privileges. She wet herself in front of everyone. Her mom had the incident report from that day. A boy I recognized from band told us he'd passed out in the hallway after losing cafeteria access. He said he'd thanked Mrs. Turner, but she claimed he mumbled it too quietly. His dad showed Mr. Terrell the emergency room records from when he collapsed. The boy had needed IV fluids just like me. His parents had complained to the school board, but nothing changed. The third student was a sophomore who'd lost library access during research paper season. She failed 2 classes because she couldn't access the computers or books. Her dad was a veteran who said he'd never seen anything like this even in military school. Mr. Terrell took notes on everything and collected copies of all their documentation. Principal Sanford showing up at a hospital room with a clipboard while a kid has a broken nose and concussion. That's like bringing a parking ticket to someone's funeral. Read the room, buddy. He spread the papers across the rolling table beside my bed. He said we had enough evidence for a federal lawsuit and complaints to multiple agencies. He started taking pictures of all the documents with his phone. He explained he'd file with the state education department and the Office for Civil Rights. Mom asked what we should do about telling people. Mr. Terrell said we could share our story, but to be careful about specific legal claims. Mom pulled out her phone and opened the town Facebook group. She typed for several minutes about what had happened to me. Within an hour, her post had over 200 reactions and dozens of comments. Parents started sharing their own kids' experiences with the gratitude policy. One mom said her daughter developed anxiety about speaking after being punished repeatedly. Another parent posted a photo of their son's bloody nose from when he fainted after being denied breakfast. The stories kept coming. Kids forced to thank the security guard for confiscating their phones. Students losing computer lab access during standardized testing week. A diabetic student denied access to the nurse's office for glucose monitoring. My phone started buzzing with messages from classmates. Some sent photos of the janitor's clipboard with student names. Others had secretly recorded staff members enforcing the policy. One kid had audio of Sanford explaining that students who didn't show proper gratitude were basically stealing from taxpayers. Mr. Terrell asked for copies of everything. That afternoon, Mom's phone rang with an unknown number. It was a reporter from the local news station. She'd seen the Facebook posts and wanted to interview us. Mom looked at Mr. Terrell, who shook his head slightly. He said we should wait until he filed the formal complaints first, but he said we could provide copies of the medical reports showing my injuries. The reporter said she'd already contacted 3 other families who wanted to go on record. She was planning a segment for the evening news. Over the next 2 days, more families reached out. Mr. Terrell set up a conference room at his firm to meet with everyone. 17 families showed up with documentation of their kids being denied services. The evidence filled 3 boxes. Some parents cried while telling their stories. Others were just angry. One dad was a cop who said if anyone else denied food to kids, they'd be arrested. On my 3rd day in the hospital, the doctor came in with discharge papers. He examined my nose, which was still swollen and purple. He checked my eyes with a light for signs of concussion problems. He said I was lucky the damage wasn't worse. He wrote a detailed report stating that malnutrition and dehydration directly caused my collapse. He noted that denying food access to a student with a medical condition showed negligence. He said my injuries were preventable if I'd been allowed to eat. The nurse gave Mom a folder with treatment instructions. I needed to rest for at least a week and avoid any activities that could worsen the concussion. I had to take antibiotics for the strep throat and pain medication for my nose. They scheduled a follow-up appointment to check if my nose was healing straight. Mom drove me home super carefully, avoiding every pothole like my head might explode if we hit one. When we got to our apartment, I had 17 messages on my phone, and Mom had over 40 on hers. Kids from the school had been texting all weekend asking if I was okay and wanting to share their own stories about the gratitude policy. One girl sent me a video she'd secretly recorded of the janitor marking his clipboard when she forgot to thank him for cleaning up a spill she didn't even make. Another kid had audio of Mrs. Turner telling him he couldn't eat unless he thanked her louder, even though the whole cafeteria could already hear him. By that evening, we had messages from 20 different students, some with recordings, others with photos of denial forms they'd gotten for not being grateful enough. Mr. Terrell came by the next morning with a stack of legal papers and spent 3 hours going through everything with us. He said we had enough evidence for an emergency injunction to stop the policy immediately while the case went forward. He filed it that afternoon, and the judge scheduled a hearing for the following week, which meant the school district would get official notice by tomorrow. Mom made me soup while I sorted through all the messages and evidence on my laptop, though I had to take breaks every 20 minutes because the screen made my head hurt from the concussion. Sure enough, 2 days later, Principal Sanford sent an email blast to every parent in the district defending the gratitude policy as essential character building that taught students important life skills. He actually wrote that students were exaggerating their experiences and that no one had been seriously harmed by learning to show proper appreciation for the hard work of school staff. He attached statistics about youth entitlement and articles about the importance of gratitude in child development. The email backfired within hours. Parents started replying all with their own kids' medical bills and therapy receipts attached. One family's insurance statement showed $8,000 in treatment costs after their daughter developed an eating disorder from losing cafeteria access for 2 months. Another parent posted receipts for emergency room visits when their diabetic son couldn't access the nurse's office. The reply all chain got so long that the district email server actually crashed for a few hours. 3 teachers reached out to mom privately through Facebook, scared to use school email. They sent screenshots of internal emails where Principal Sanford threatened to fire anyone who didn't strictly enforce the gratitude requirements. One teacher had been written up for letting a kid use the bathroom without verbal thanks when the kid was clearly about to throw up. Another got in trouble for not reporting a student who whispered thanks instead of speaking at normal volume. The cafeteria workers union rep called Mr. Terrell directly after hearing about the lawsuit. She said Sanford had made all food service employees sign agreements that they'd report any student who didn't thank them or they'd lose their jobs. She had copies of the agreements and testimonies from workers who felt terrible about denying food to hungry kids but couldn't afford to get fired. During all this legal stuff, I was dealing with splitting headaches that made me want to puke. Mom had to wake me up every 3 hours at night to check if I was okay, shining a flashlight in my eyes to make sure my pupils were the same size. I couldn't eat normal meals because my stomach was all messed up from not eating for a week. Even crackers made me feel sick. The doctor said it would take time for my body to adjust to food again after the starvation. 5 days after the filing, the school board called an emergency meeting. They sent out a robocall at 6 in the morning saying they'd be discussing the gratitude policy at 7 that night. By 6:30, the parking lot was completely full and parents were parking on the grass and sidewalks. 3 news vans showed up with cameras and reporters interviewing parents outside. The auditorium was packed so tight that people were standing along the walls and sitting in the aisles. They had to open the cafeteria and set up a video feed for overflow. The board members sat at their long table looking really uncomfortable as hundreds of angry parents stared at them. They started with public comments, limiting each person to 2 minutes. When they called my name, I stood up super slowly because quick movements made the room spin. Mom helped me walk to the microphone at the front. I explained how I physically couldn't speak because of strep throat, how I had a doctor's note, how I tried every possible way to show gratitude without words. I told them about passing out face first during my chemistry final, breaking my nose, getting a concussion, all because the school chose their policy over letting a sick kid eat. I showed them the hospital bills, the photos of my broken nose, the doctor's report about malnutrition. The board members kept looking at each other nervously. After me, other students got up to testify. My friend who bled through her clothes told her story, while her mom held up the ruined pants as evidence. A boy with diabetes explained how he went into shock when he couldn't access the nurse for his insulin. A girl with anxiety showed her therapy bills from developing a fear of speaking after being punished so many times. Each story was worse than the last, and the board members looked more and more uncomfortable as the night went on. Principal Sanford stood up from his chair at the side of the room and walked to the podium carrying a thick binder. He flipped it open and started pulling out papers covered in charts and graphs while the whole auditorium went quiet. These records show 92% compliance with gratitude requirements over the past 2 years, he said. He held up page after page of the janitor's clipboard copies and attendance sheets with check marks next to names. The security guard's daily logs showed which students said thanks and which ones didn't. He had spreadsheets tracking bathroom access denials and food service restrictions sorted by date and student name. He actually smiled while showing a graph where gratitude compliance went up after punishments increased. This data proves the system works exactly as designed. One of the board members leaned forward into her microphone. Mr. Sanford, did you really go to this student's hospital room and demand thanks while they were injured? The whole room held its breath. Sanford straightened his tie and nodded. Yes. Consistency is the foundation of any behavioral modification program. The board member's face went red. You demanded gratitude from a child with a broken nose and concussion that your policy caused? Sanford opened his mouth to answer, but the crowd erupted in angry shouting. How did Principal Sanford track all those thank yous with such detail? The clipboards and spreadsheets and graphs? Did he really spend hours making charts about which kids said thanks? Parents were standing up and yelling while the board president banged his gavel trying to restore order. 3 days later, a letter arrived from the state education department saying they were launching a full investigation into our school. They sent 2 investigators who set up in the library and started interviewing students one by one. Kids lined up down the hallway waiting to tell their stories. The investigators took notes on everything and collected copies of all the punishment records and denial logs. They asked for the original clipboards and tracking sheets that staff had been using. Mr. Terrell filed the federal lawsuit that same week at the courthouse downtown. He named the school district, Principal Sanford personally, and the board members who knew about the policy but didn't stop it. The lawsuit asked for medical costs, pain and suffering damages, and an immediate end to all gratitude requirements. He also demanded Sanford be removed from any position where he had power over students. Local news crews showed up at the school every morning filming students going through the metal detectors without having to say thanks anymore. I was walking to my locker after school about a week later when the security guard approached me in the empty hallway. He looked around to make sure nobody was watching and spoke quietly. I'm sorry about what happened to you. He rubbed his face and sighed. I knew it was wrong, but I have 3 kids and I needed this job. He pulled out a business card and handed it to me. That's my number if your lawyer needs me to testify about what really went on here. More staff started coming forward after that. The janitor showed up at Mr. Terrell's office with a cardboard box full of clipboards dating back 2 years. Each one had hundreds of names with marks showing who thanked him and who didn't. He had notes in the margins about which kids lost bathroom access and for how long. The librarian brought her computer access logs showing she'd blocked over 300 students from using school computers for not saying thanks. Even some teachers came forward with emails where Sanford threatened to fire them if they didn't enforce the policy strictly. The school district hired a child psychologist to evaluate students who'd been affected by the gratitude policy. She spent 3 weeks interviewing kids and reviewing medical records. Her report said the forced gratitude system created a culture of fear and control instead of genuine appreciation. She wrote that students showed signs of anxiety, depression, and trauma from being denied basic needs. She said making children thank adults adults for searching their bags or denying them food was psychological manipulation. About a month into the lawsuit, the school district's lawyer called Mr. Terrell to discuss a settlement. They offered to pay all our medical bills and therapy costs if we dropped the lawsuit and signed papers saying we wouldn't talk about the case publicly. They wanted to make everything go away quietly without admitting they did anything wrong. Mr. Terrell called my mom and explained the offer. We talked about it over dinner that night, but Mom shook her head. This isn't just about money. It's about making sure this never happens to another kid. Mr. Terrell told the district lawyer we were rejecting their offer and proceeding with the lawsuit. We're not fighting for a payout, he said in his response letter. We're fighting to protect future students from this kind of abuse. Word spread through town about what was happening at the school. The pizza place downtown put up a sign in their window saying, "Free lunch for any student affected by the gratitude policy. No thanks required." The sandwich shop followed with their own sign. The local diner started a fund to help families pay for therapy costs. Even the grocery store put up a display by the registers collecting donations for affected students. More businesses joined in each day until Main Street was full of support signs. The hearing happened 2 days later at the courthouse downtown. Mr. Terrell stood in front of the judge with a stack of papers 3 inches thick. He showed her the medical reports from my hospital stay and photos of my broken nose. He had statements from 27 students about being denied food, bathrooms, or other basic services. The judge's face got harder with each page she read. She kept shaking her head and writing notes on her legal pad. After an hour of looking through everything, she banged her gavel and issued a temporary restraining order. The gratitude policy had to stop immediately. No more forced thanks for anything. Students could get food, use bathrooms, and access all services without saying a single word. The school district's lawyer tried to argue, but the judge cut him off. She said denying children food was child abuse, not character education. When I went back to the school the next Monday, everything felt different. The security guard just waved kids through the metal detector without waiting for thanks. He actually looked relieved, like someone had taken a heavy weight off his shoulders. The cafeteria workers served food with small smiles, instead of standing there waiting for verbal gratitude. Mrs. Turner put extra mashed potatoes on my tray and winked at me. The janitor had thrown away his clipboard and was actually whistling while he mopped. Students walked through the halls without that scared look they used to have. Nobody had to calculate whether they'd said thanks enough times to use the bathroom. The attendance lady marked kids present without making them perform gratitude. That same morning, an announcement came over the speakers that Principal Sanford was on administrative leave. The whole school went quiet for a second, then you could hear cheering from different classrooms. An interim principal named Ms. Rodriguez took over and called an assembly that afternoon. She stood at the podium and said student welfare would be her top priority. She apologized for what we'd been through and promised things would change. She set up a box outside her office where students could leave anonymous notes about their concerns. The state investigators showed up that week and started interviewing everyone. They pulled students out of class one by one to ask about their experiences. They went through Sanford's office and took boxes of files. They examined years of emails and memos. After 2 weeks of digging, they found something big. Sanford had been getting bonus payments for his character education programs. The district gave him extra money every year based on his gratitude compliance rates. He was literally making thousands of dollars by forcing us to thank people. The investigators found spreadsheets where he tracked percentages and calculated his bonuses. 3 weeks after the investigation started, the school board called another emergency meeting. They voted to fire Sanford for gross misconduct. The board president read a statement saying they were deeply sorry for allowing the policy to continue. They admitted they should have listened when parents complained. They promised to review all policies to make sure nothing like this could happen again. The local paper ran the story on the front page with the headline, "Principal Fired After Gratitude Policy Abuse." The district also agreed to pay all medical bills for students who got hurt because of the policy. They set up a fund for therapy and mental health support. My mom got a letter saying they'd cover my hospital stay, the broken nose surgery, and therapy sessions. Other families got similar letters. Kids who developed eating disorders or anxiety got long-term treatment covered. The district hired counselors specifically to help students recover from what happened. Mr. Terrell said we still needed to continue with the federal lawsuit, though. He explained that paying medical bills wasn't enough. We needed an official court ruling to protect students everywhere. He wanted legal precedent that would stop any school from trying something similar. He filed papers in federal court asking for a judgment on constitutional violations. He said denying food and bathrooms violated basic human rights. The case would take months, but he was confident we'd win. Meanwhile, a reporter from a big national news network called my mom. They'd heard about our story and wanted to do a segment on it. Mom agreed after talking to Mr. Terrell. The reporter came to our house with a camera crew and interviewed me for 2 hours. They also talked to other students and filmed at the school. When the story aired on national TV, my phone started buzzing non-stop. I got messages from kids all over the country who dealt with similar stuff at their schools. One girl in Texas said her principal made students do push-ups to earn lunch. A boy in Ohio said his school charged bathroom tokens that cost $1 each. Kids from everywhere shared stories about adults using power to control them. The messages kept coming for days. Education reform groups started reaching out to Mr. Terrell. 3 big organizations offered to help with our case. They had lawyers who specialized in student rights and experts who studied school discipline. One group sent us research showing that forced gratitude actually makes kids less grateful in real life. Another group had psychologists who could testify about the damage these policies cause. They all wanted to use our case to protect students nationwide. During all this, I was still recovering from what happened. The concussion headaches finally started to fade after a few weeks. I could eat regular meals again without feeling sick, but I still got anxious at lunchtime. My therapist said it was normal after being denied food for so long. She taught me breathing exercises to use when I felt panicked about eating. Mom made sure I had snacks in my backpack so I'd never worry about going hungry again. The broken nose healed, but left a small bump that the doctor said was permanent. Principal Sanford getting bonus money for making kids say thanks is like finding out the tooth fairy charges interest. Suddenly, the whole magical system seems a lot less friendly. Some days I still felt dizzy from the concussion effects. At the federal courthouse 3 months later, I sat between my mom and Mr. Terrell watching the judge shuffle through a stack stack of papers thicker than my chemistry textbook. The courtroom was packed with families from our school, reporters filling the back rows, and Principal Sanford sitting at the defendant's table looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. The judge cleared his throat and started reading his decision, saying the school district had violated students' constitutional rights to equal protection under the law. He said denying basic services like food and bathroom access for any reason was unconstitutional, and his ruling would set legal precedent to protect students nationwide. Principal Sanford's lawyer kept objecting, but the judge shut him down every time. The ruling was final and binding, making it illegal for any school in America to deny students food, water, bathrooms, or medical care as punishment. Mr. Terrell squeezed my shoulder as the judge kept reading, listing all the ways the gratitude policy had violated federal law. 2 weeks after the ruling, we got the settlement paperwork in the mail showing $30,000 for my medical costs, therapy, and pain and suffering. Other families got their own settlements based on what their kids went through, with the girl who bled through her pants getting $25,000 and the boy who failed his research paper getting $15,000 for academic damages. The district had to pay out over $500,000 total to affected students. The school board called an emergency meeting to implement the court-ordered changes, and they invited students and parents to help write new policies. We spent 6 hours in the conference room going through every single rule to make sure nothing like the gratitude policy could happen again. They wrote it into official district policy that all students would have unconditional access to food, bathrooms, water fountains, and medical care, regardless of behavior or compliance with any other rules. The new policies specifically banned withholding any basic service as punishment or requiring any specific expression to receive services. We also worked on a student rights handbook that spelled out exactly what schools could and couldn't do. The handbook said students had the right to food even if they couldn't pay, the right to use bathrooms without asking permission during emergencies, and the right to medical care without conditions. It listed phone numbers students could call if their rights were violated, including legal aid services and the state education department's complaint line. The school board voted unanimously to adopt the handbook and make it required reading for all staff. At the state capitol building, legislators were drafting what everyone called the gratitude law, which would ban schools statewide from requiring specific expressions of thanks for basic services. The bill's sponsor read my story into the official record, and other students from around the state testified about similar experiences at their schools. The law passed with only 3 votes against it, and the governor signed it at a ceremony where I got to stand behind him holding the pen he used. Other states started calling Mr. Terrell asking for copies of the law so they could pass their own versions. Within 6 months, 12 states had similar laws on the books or in process. The state education board also voted to revoke Principal Sanford's education license permanently after their investigation found he'd tried the same gratitude policy at 2 previous schools. The investigation report showed he'd left both schools when parents started complaining, then moved to our district and convinced the board his policy would teach character. He'd actually published articles in education journals promoting forced gratitude as a discipline tool, and the state board said his pattern of behavior showed he was unfit to work with children. His teaching certificate and administrator license were both revoked with no possibility of reinstatement. The interim principal who'd taken over during the investigation got the permanent job after the school board interviewed her and several other candidates. She immediately started monthly forums where students could bring up concerns directly to her without going through teachers or counselors first. At the first forum, she actually took notes on everything students said and followed up with real changes, like extending passing periods by 2 minutes so kids had time to use the bathroom and removing the rule about needing hall passes for the water fountain. She put suggestion boxes in every hallway and read every single note students put in them. When students complained about the dress code being unfair, she formed a committee with equal numbers of students and staff to rewrite it. My mom decided to run for school board on a platform of student safety and parent involvement. She knocked on doors all over town telling our story and explaining why parent voices needed to be heard in the school decisions. She won with 78% of the vote, the biggest margin in the school board election history. At her first meeting as a board member, she proposed requiring the board to hear from students at every meeting, not just when there was a problem. The security guard who'd enforced the gratitude policy asked to speak at a school assembly to apologize for his role in what happened. He stood at the microphone for a full minute before he could talk, then told everyone how sorry he was for choosing his job over doing what was right. He said he'd been afraid of losing his paycheck, but realized that was no excuse for participating in something that hurt kids. He started working with the new principal to rebuild trust, volunteering to supervise activities without his clipboard, and actually talking to students like people instead of potential rule breakers. He became one of the biggest advocates for student rights in the school, speaking up in staff meetings when teachers suggested policies that might harm kids. A year after my collapse in chemistry class, I got an invitation to speak at a national education conference about our experience. I stood in front of 300 educators and told them how students in our school had organized to fight back against an unjust system and won. I showed them pictures of kids standing in the hallway because they couldn't thank the teacher for opening the door, and the room went completely silent. I finished my presentation and walked off the stage with my hands still shaking a little bit. Back at the school the next month, construction workers started tearing down all those old gratitude requirement signs that used to be everywhere. They dug up the concrete posts and hauled away the metal frames while students watched from the windows during class. The new principal asked the student council what should go in that empty space by the main entrance where the biggest sign used to stand. My friend who'd bled through her pants that day in algebra raised her hand and suggested a garden where students could actually sit and talk without being monitored. The principal approved it right away and even let students help design it. We planted flowers and put in benches and this little fountain that made a nice sound when you walked by. Kids started eating lunch there when the weather was good, and nobody had to thank anybody for the privilege of sitting on a bench. That same friend ran for student body president the next year and won by a huge margin. She made these new rules that guaranteed every student could use the bathroom whenever they needed to and could get water without asking permission. She set up a system where students could report problems problems anonymously, and the administration actually had to respond within 3 days. The cafeteria workers seemed happier too, without having to act like gratitude police all the time. Mrs. Turner started smiling at kids when she served food, and would sometimes give extra portions without anyone having to beg or perform thanks. She told me once that she actually liked her job, now that she could just focus on feeding hungry kids instead of enforcing stupid rules. Senior year came faster than I expected, even with all the time I'd missed during the legal stuff. My grades stayed strong because teachers let me make up work and take tests when I could. When college application time came around, I wrote my main essay about that day in the hospital when I refused to thank Principal Sanford. The guidance counselor said it was risky to write about confronting authority, but I sent it anyway. 3 months later, I got an acceptance letter from my dream school with a full scholarship attached. They said my essay showed exactly the kind of student they wanted, someone who'd stand up for what's right even when it's hard. At graduation, I was picked to give one of the student speeches. I stood at that same podium where Principal Sanford used to lecture us about gratitude and talked about the difference between real appreciation and forced compliance. I thanked my mom for fighting for me, Mr. Terrell for taking our case, the security guard for eventually doing the right thing, and all the students who'd stood up together. Nobody made me say any of it, which is why I actually meant every word. The school district created this annual award for student advocacy and named it after all of us who'd fought the gratitude policy. The first person to get it was the girl who'd shared her story at the hospital about wetting herself in class. She'd started a support group for students dealing with anxiety from the whole thing and helped dozens of kids. My mom and I spent the summer after graduation writing down everything that had happened from the beginning. A publisher picked it up, and now it's used in education programs to teach future teachers and administrators about student rights. The judge using words like unconstitutional makes me wonder what specific laws protect students from policies like this. Does denying bathroom access actually violate the Constitution itself? Or are there other laws involved too? The way everything changed so fast is really interesting. We donate all the money from the book to the student rights organization we helped create with Mr. Terrell. 3 years have passed since then, and I'm sitting in my law school library studying for my education law exam. I picked this field specifically because of what happened to us. Sometimes I think about that day I collapsed in chemistry class with my face hitting the floor and breaking my nose. That moment changed everything. Not just for me, but for thousands of students who now have real protection from administrators who think they can control kids through punishment and forced gratitude. Principal Sanford can never work in education again, and there are laws in multiple states now that specifically prevent schools from denying basic services for any reason. When new students at my law school ask why I chose education law, I tell them this whole story and watch their faces change from confused to angry to determined. That's how I know we really did make a difference, because people still care and still want to fight for what's right. Well, folks, that's story time wrapped up. Appreciate you letting me throw in my 2 cents along the way. If you made it to the end, drop a comment. I love reading all your comments.